Welcome home. We are WNST. Taos, Baltimore. Baltimore Positive. It is a playoff time around here. We are playing hasty baseball around here. We're awaiting some football this weekend as well. All things WNST are going to be back in action next Friday. Hopefully the Orioles are still around at that point. I'll have Raven scratch-offs to give away. It is Friday the 11th. It is Luke's birthday this week. It's my birthday next week. We are converging next Friday for the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. We're going to be Pizza John's in Essex. I did that for Luke because it's Luke's favorite place. He might need some pizza once the Orioles get eliminated. Hey, Ravens won this week. That's all we can say. Also, our friends at the Maryland Oyster Tour and the Oyster Recovery Partnership have thrown us out with Curio Wellness, Far and Daughter, and our friends. And I don't have my Liberty Pure Solutions water. Yeah, I did because I drank some of it in my studio because the Orioles made me drink. 800 clean water is the way to make that happen. Luke Jones joins us now in the aftermath of which one we won't forget, I guess, right? Like, game wasn't a sellout, 4 o'clock, weather was kind of weird, pitching was kind of great, hitting not so great. If Earl Weaver were to sit up one last time and you were to ask him, he'd tell you playoffs, all about pitching. It's all about pitching. October's all about pitching. Pitching. We need the pitching. We got to go get Corbin Burnes. We got to go get Eflin at the deadline. This is why you go get dudes, right? And I don't think the Orioles got the wrong dude. I mean, Corbin Burnes, he may never make another start for the Orioles. He may never pitch again. This may have been a rental for Ortiz for 9 months, but he gave them more than enough to win Game 1 of the wild card on Tuesday, Luke.
I mean, this is what they got him for. They got him back in early February because of the face plant that their starting pitching did in last October's Division Series sweep to the Rangers. Understanding it was young guys. I mean, it was Kyle Bradish's first career start. He pitched pretty well, actually, in that game. Grayson Rodriguez, not so much. Dean Kramer, not so much. But you acquire Corbin Burnes with the idea that he's starting Game 1. You've been talking about Game 1 for the better part of 6 weeks. Amidst the struggles of the Orioles down the stretch. And Corbin Burnes goes a season high 8 innings. He very much had a chance to finish that game. I mean, if it's 2-1 there, I'm not so sure that you're going to. Certainly not going to Keegan Aiken after the leadoff single in the 9th. But, maybe Corbin Burnes tries to finish that game, but gives up 1 run, gives up 1 RBI single to Bobby Witt Jr. I saw a lot of people talk about potentially walking him there. I don't think you do that. However, I will say this. I'd like to see him miss the plate on that first pitch rather than that cutter catching a little bit too much of the plate low and away. I would have liked to have seen him maybe throw a sweeper there. He had thrown a first pitch cutter to Witt on the first 2 at-bats, and it had worked, right? I mean, it's not like Bobby Witt, even the RBI single, it's not like he hammered that ball. Just hit it in the right spot. Solid contact on a first pitch cutter and gets it by Gunnar Henderson into left field. But
it's terrible. He's got to think about that because, like, there's one run. Well, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it was a single, right? I mean, it was nothing about it.
Right. And really the mistake was walking Michael Garcia, right? The number 9 hitter, and he steals second base, which wasn't a surprise. I mean, we know Burnes doesn't hold runners particularly well, and that's also a legitimate base stealer there. So that was what he really, truly lamented. So I was just kind of covering and addressing people who, look, it's a fair question. Bobby Witt, if it weren't for Aaron Judge, would be a slam dunk MVP having a historic season. But they pitched to him, your best guy. I mean, Kansas City wasn't surprised that Burnes pitched to Witt. Brandon Hyde certainly said, hey, I'm going to let my guy go after who he thinks is best to go after. And Bobby Witt won that battle. So, but any talk beyond that goes back to the fact that you didn't score a run. You didn't score a single run. I did say, and you can go back and listen to it from a couple days ago, that there was way too much celebrating about the fact that the Orioles had avoided Tarek Skubal and the Detroit Tigers, because I said Cole Reagans is an all-star. Cole Reagans is going to get Cy Young votes. He's going to get in that top 5 voting.
Well, they're lucky they didn't get 20 more pitches of him, right? I mean, that easily would have been 2 more innings of him had he not had that cramp, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, at least 1 more inning, right? I mean, this is a young guy. I mean, he wasn't going to go 115 pitches, but he certainly was going to go longer than he did. So that was another instance there where something went their way, actually. That was something that you would have hoped. I asked Gunnar Henderson in the post-game clubhouse if that was a moment where they thought, okay, here's our opening. We didn't do much against Reagan's. Let's go. And yeah, they didn't do anything against the Kansas City bullpen either. And that bullpen was good down the stretch. And Lucas Irsig, a 4-out save. He's someone that when you and I were talking trade deadline at Fadley's a
Go ahead and
couple
brag.
weeks.
Everybody in the press box sent a tweet out about you screaming about needing him as opposed to Trevor Rogers.
Well, I mean, I didn't scream it. Let's be clear, but he was certainly amongst the names that I mentioned to say, hey, this is a guy that you can throw out there in high leverage. And Kansas City acquired him from Oakland and made him their closer, and he did the job. But again, this
If
comes
they're still
back
playing
to
baseball 2 or 3 weeks from now, you'll look at that and say, well, I mean, that's what the trading deadline's about, is about improving your team. And I have nothing on the trading deadline. I mean, other people are beating up Mike Elias. They lost a 1-0 game
right.
in
Sure.
the playoffs. I mean, like
Yeah.
they could play that game 100 times over. Those pitchers are elite, and I think you can see the difference between that. And no offense to Dean Kramer, I'm just going to use him, but I'll use Suarez because we've had a whole Venezuelan Anglo debate here this week with the Whistler and the Orioles. Doesn't matter who it is, but like there's a difference between a dude and not a dude. And then there's also a difference between having Maddox, Glavine, Smoltz, and have them go out there and only one of them looks like that in October, because that happens too. There are
Yeah.
plenty of guys that have gone out in October. I mean, you could mention the Giants starters, the Dodgers starters from years ago, whether it's, Clayton Kershaw, just all of these guys, if they were all buzzsaws, they all would have won World Series, a lot more World Series, and pitching a lot more big games, because big game starters, guys like Corbin Burnes, they only get a handful of chances to even make these kind of October starts in a lot of cases. And it's not just a microscope, it's a telescope. It's something that uh, playoff baseball is just so different. I mean, I sensed it when I went out to the Beaumont. I picked my wife up from the airport on Tuesday night. She's been gone on a family issue, and we went out. I mean, just all the long faces and just the feeling of losing a 1-0 playoff game. Every fan of the Orioles, like, this is a rare feeling to lose October playoff games because we haven't had any of them. People don't even know how it feels. That's a devastating loss. I mean, I just, all the air went out of the city on Tuesday night, and I mean, I wrote a Dear David Rubenstein letter. I tell him that's a good thing. That means people care. Like people are into it, people care. But man, it's high stakes, especially these games. I mean, the Zach Britton game we remember, man, that was 10 years ago. Like the one and done wild cards, and it's going to feel one and done if the sun sets tonight and the season's over. It's going to feel like a 1-game playoff, but it happens so
Yep.
fast, and you have to have this pitching. And we'll get to it in a minute. You have to hit the ball too.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, Corbin Burnes gave up 1 run in 8 innings. I mean, that was excellent. That's all you could reasonably ask. You can't ask your pitcher. You can't expect your pitcher to go out and throw a shutout. I mean, even Cole Reagan's, as good as he was lifted after 6 innings. I mean, they had their chance, right? They had their opportunities. They had their opportunities against Cole Reagan's, and we can get into that. But it's deflating. I think you just mentioned it. Obviously, this is not the 1-game wild card, so it's not that extreme. However, now, you're really apt to be patient, to not overreact, even in a 5-game series, right? Where if you go down 0-1, hey, you got at least 2 more cracks at it. And that's where the Orioles were at that point in game 2 when Grayson Rodriguez took the ball against the Rangers last October. And we saw how that happened. But it is tough to not make it feel like your season is absolutely on the brink in the way that it would be if you were down 3-0, right? In a best of 7. You need to think about this more in terms of, okay, you're down 3-2 in a best of 7. Because that's what it is right now. You win 2, you win the last 2, you're moving on. That's not insurmountable. That's not something that hasn't been done many times in the history of baseball. But in a best of 7 where you're down 3-2, you've won 2 games already, right? You've tasted victory in this case, and this is why I think you making the point about game 1 so many times, and you were mentioning it more in the context of Corbin Burnes, but I think it's bigger than that for so many of these other guys who were here last year. And now you're thinking about, oh, are we going to be out just like that again, just
I
like we
said
were
this to my
last
wife
year.
at dinner. I'm like, if they lose tomorrow, I don't have any plans in October. Literally, other than this crab cake tour next week, I cleaned my calendar. I didn't make sales calls. I didn't make appointments. You and I could be in New York on Monday. It'd be fun. Why wouldn't we go? If I got $100 room in New York and you and I are up there, like, why wouldn't you go and squeeze out the juice of whatever this season has been, which was really nice the first 3 months. Not so great the last 3 months. Certainly doesn't feel good today, right now. But like, I clean the whole calendar out for
No.
us, for you, for me, for my real life to watch baseball. And like, if I'm sobbing in my natty bow at 8 o'clock tonight, it would really be deflating if this thing goes the wrong way, especially today. And I dare I say today, because like Tommy Conwell says, there ain't no tomorrow, baby. There's just right now. They better be playing a game on Thursday, right?
I mean, you could say that, but Seth Lugo is going to the hill. I mean, you're talking about another all-star starting pitcher. I hope, for Baltimore's sake, for this club's sake, that they get off the mat and they answer the bell. And Zach Eflin is as good as Corbin Burnes was, and your
How about
offense is
somebody hits the ball? How about somebody gets in
right.
here?
Exactly, exactly. But I'm also not going to be shocked, as I wrote at BaltimorePositive.com. Look, the October Orioles debut was very similar to what we saw throughout the second half of the season, right? I mean, I guess the only thing you would say is they didn't kick the ball around defensively, right? But they didn't hit. And we saw plenty of that as the month of August went on. We saw plenty of that, a lot of that in the month of September. But they had the 5-1 finish to close the regular season. They had the late September return of Jordan Westberg and Ramon Arias. And even though it didn't apply, Danny Coulomb and Jacob Webb and Heston Kjerstad, I mean, they got all the members of the band that could come back for the remainder of the season, other than Grayson Rodriguez. They all came back. So there was optimism, right, that October was going to be different. And instead, one loss and your season's on life support. But that's the reality of a best of three. And you just mentioned it. I mean, just because you play a certain way or you have a certain record in the regular season or even in the month of September. I mean, Kansas City had a bad September, but
They had a good starting pitcher on Tuesday.
The slate is wiped clean, and their starting pitcher was, I don't want to say he was better than Corbin Burnes. For one thing, I mean, he went 6 innings, but I would say he was more dominant in terms of missing bats. I'm not saying that as a knock on Burnes. Burnes was great.
Yeah, we'll talk about missing bats in a minute. We should do a whole friggin' segment on swinging through pitches and James McCann and lineup and where Rutschman. We can go through all of that. But
Cole Reagans is great at that. I mean, go look. I mean, this is a guy who averaged 11 plus strikeouts per 9 innings. I mean, that's really elite territory for a starting pitcher.
He reminded me of Glavine. I mean, just the way he looked, the way he threw the ball. And then, I watched the earlier game. That guy Scoople's a monster. I mean, he's like. He reminds me of Richie Paff in Little League, and Barry Stitz knows what I'm talking about. So does Karolkowski. But I mean, just big, nasty, overhand, hard throwing, Sabathia kind of like nasty. I'll say this, when it's all over with and the Requiem's done, and whenever it ends, today, tomorrow, next week, when they don't win the World Series, because I don't think they're winning the World Series, but you can come back and beat me up. If I'm the guy the morning after they lose game one and they go win the World Series, you can find the tape and saying, I don't think they're winning the World Series.
I don't think no one's saying that right now. I mean,
I'd be okay doing that.
Yeah, I think you'd be okay doing that. I mean, but like I'll continue to say it, and I hear you. I love Tarek Skubal, but Cole Reagans was excellent this year. I mean, especially you look at the peripherals with the strikeout to walk ratio and all of that. He probably was better than what his season ERA was. That's how impressive he was over the course of the season. And this is a guy that, had 2 Tommy John surgeries early in his minor league career. I mean, this is a guy who, go look at his minor league numbers. He had multiple seasons where he didn't pitch at all. So he's actually a great story. We haven't paid attention to him because it's the Kansas City Royals. I mean, they lost 106 games a year ago. The Royals have been a really good story. If it weren't for what the Tigers did in the month of September, everyone would be talking about the Royals in the context that they're talking about the Tigers right now. That's why I kept saying, and I don't mean to you, I mean in general, when people were saying, oh, wow, the Orioles got lucky, they're avoiding Tariq Skubal, just like, hold the phones. Cole Reagans is really good. Seth Lugo, I mean, that's as formidable as a starting 1-2 punch as just about anyone has in baseball, other than maybe if you want to look at the Phillies and maybe a couple other teams, but theirs statistically is as good as anybody that's left in this field, AL or NL. So I was saying, hey, you got to be ready. Cole Reagans is really good. This wasn't fluky. I'm not giving the Orioles a pass. Let's be clear. You've got to go out and score some runs. You can't get shut out in a postseason game, especially when your ace goes 8 innings of one-run ball. But at the same time, Cole Reagans isn't a slug. He's not a he's not a bum, right? I mean, he's no slouch. So I can't sit here and say I'm shocked about it, but you've got to move past it. You've got to turn the page. And the problem is, as much as you're apt to try to compartmentalize and just move on and say, hey, that's over next day, and that applies, but you know that the stakes are way higher than that. This isn't a case where even in a best of seven, you drop game one, it's disappointing, but you're not feeling your season's on the brink. You drop game one in a best of three. I mean, you're staving off elimination the next day. So
Next 2 days.
they're gonna have, yeah. Well, and even if they win, you're doing that the next 2 days, sure. But
Dude, I hope you and I are here tomorrow, talking about a game 2 victory, a 5-3 win, and they swung the bats a little bit and somebody hit the ball and there's a spark of life, because that is how this happens. Me sitting here pissing myself, crying on Wednesday morning, saying, oh, next thing you know, Saturday morning, Luke and I are firing up the old megabus. And next thing you know, the lights are on in the Bronx on Saturday. You like, because it does happen like that. I mean, it happens very, very quickly, but it was disheartening and not hitting the ball, which is not, it's a trend.
yeah,
It's been a way of life around here. And then getting that kind of pitching and having it not work. Luke Jones is here. He's Baltimore Luke. We're going to be back after it. He'll be at the ballpark today. We have no coverage of the Ravens. If you want to know why we don't have Ravens coverage, email Chad Steele. I'm sick of it, especially on a day like today. It really pisses me off. If you want to read my David Rubenstein letter, please read that. I've been doing this work 33 years. These people are a disgrace not letting me in, and running Luke ragged and having me not have coverage. So I just want to say that. Having my radio station for 26 years not have coverage is disgraceful. Disgraceful. And discriminating against me and saying one guy can go, another, disgraceful, disgraceful. I want to say it again and again, disgraceful. So that being said, pitching, Burnes, right? The minute he walks off the hill, the real fans, the fans that are way nastier than me, like I'm out on Twitter and you can see, it's like being in a bad bar. I mean, what a cesspool that website is, but if used properly, you only get 3 Elon Musk Trump ads a day. But nonetheless, the the Corbin Burnes experiment for this organization at a time where John owned the team allegedly, Elias takes on payroll. They have a new owner. I'm sure he was in contact with Rubenstein in February and March when the thing happened, that there was some level of don't give the farm away. I'll be there April 1st, whatever, right? Corbin Burnes happens. That I don't want to say that's an outlier. They had enough in their farm system to give up a major league player. I mean, a guy that's going to be in the big leagues for a number of years, to rent him, to your point, for yesterday. Nice to have him for those 28, 32 starts, whatever you're going to get out of him. Was great for 3 months, stunk for a month, pretty decent for the last month. You get him. It's over for it. Their relationship's over now, right? Unless he's pitching in New York on, I guess, which would be Monday night, right? Unless that happens, that transaction is now over. And Corbin Burnes, according to Ben McDonald in the broadcast, he's going to be a $200 million. Well, we always say that. Scott Boras is saying $500 million pitcher, right? But the reality of now, I saw where Mr. Rubenstein's never spoken to me, but he speaks to whatever the banner, whoever has a paywall, he'll speak to them. And apparently said, well, I guess we're going to have to spend some money. Yeah. Yeah. Did you look into this before you bought the team? Did you look into how these angry, you think my letter's bad? You should hear what they say on the internet. I wrote a civil letter, about my professionalism, but people expect this time next year, if they get to the playoffs, who's their number one starter? I guess it's Eflin. He better look like that today, right? And they're already paying him on a short track for next year, part of the deal in August. But this is how tough Mike Elias' job is in managing it's different for DeCosta and those guys because they have money falling off a tree too. I mean, there were empty seats the other day. This team's not rolling in the kind of money unless Mr. Rubenstein's just really, really generous. If he's generous, he'd leave me a freaking press pass today. But if he's really generous, he'll put an extra 50 or 60 million in for the next couple of years and add another 20 to 30 million to the payroll the way Peter did. I mean, I talk bad about Peter plenty. Peter pissed a lot of money away in 2002, 3, 4, 5, chasing ghosts and being 25, 30 million dollars upside down on revenue and payroll. I don't know. Mr. Rubenstein doesn't run upside down businesses to clap. I'm not even convinced he's like this hardcore baseball fan or has baseball people around him. I think he wanted to be famous, and I think he has a lot of money and was looking for a toy. That's what I think. We'll find out. But it's a way better toy when you don't feel the way you feel today. When you lose, buying Corbin Burnes to start next year's game one or someone like him, or you were trying to steal Scooble at the trading deadline. There was no stealing. You have to give Jackson Holiday away to get, you know what I mean? Like, you weren't going to steal that guy. But this is hard to do, to find the kind of pitching that you're going to be able to go, because we don't love Dean Kramer. We don't love most of these guys. We like Bradish. Might never be the same. Same thing with Means. These guys, they're ancient history now. They're going to have to go out next year, and there's going to be all these expectations, and the orange birdland, they're going to come out, and whatever's going to happen the next day or couple of weeks with the team. But getting another Corbin Burnes to go get you a game one, I got to tip my cap to Elias, because I'd say this, as much as they'll beat him up over at those idiots over 105.7, I mean, he gave them everything. He's exactly what they needed. They brought him in. He was dude most of the year. He didn't look like Jim Palmer in August, fine. But, like, it's going to be really hard to get another dude like that can come and do that, because that's going to be a $200 million expense for this program. And that's my long-winded on a day when we're not going to do a lot of radio, just saying, like, replicating the pitching that you're going to need this time of year. Mr. Rubenstein better not be telling guess we're going to have to spend some money. You better have a plan, dude. Katie Griggs, all of you better have a plan, because winning these games, if Burnes and Eflin aren't good enough, if something bad happens and they lose 4-2 today and Eflin really pitches well and gets 6 2/3 or whatever, they're good enough to make this happen. This never would have happened under Angelos. Like, literally, taking on this money, taking on these pitchers with the stadiums empty. We're not selling tickets. It's the crime. It's the game time. It's the weather. The kids are school. Tickets are $12 at game time, and people didn't want to come. The pitching part of this and paying for it, I don't. This is rarefied air. It's really hard to get to October, and it's really hard to win in October. And to your point, they don't draft Tarek Scoobles. They don't draft pitchers. You beat me up pretty good. You sat me down and gave me a talking to 2 weeks ago. They don't draft pitchers, so they have to buy them. So I am concerned from a pitching perspective. If this isn't good enough, and it was good enough, but what's it going to cost? And winning a World Series they're gonna have to invest in Corbin Burnes. They're gonna have to buy him or a dude like him, because you can't come in October without him.
See, I think that's the wrong way to look at it. I mean, if you're singularly focused on one player, then yeah, you're going to give him a $200 million contract, and
he's going to get hurt.
He's going to get hurt. And now September changed my thinking on this a bit, because he did make the tweaks with the cutter and he did start missing more bats. Go look at his strikeout rate over the last 4 years. It's declined. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying here with 100% conviction, do not sign Corbin Burnes under any circumstances. That's not at all what I'm saying here. What I'm saying here is there are always multiple paths to get where you need to go. And I would look no further than the Texas Rangers a year ago. Nathan Eovaldi wasn't a $200 million contract guy. Jordan Montgomery was a rental. So there are always ways to do that. I mean, Zach Eflin, even if Grayson Rodriguez had come back, Zach Eflin was going to be their game 2 starter the way he pitched over the last 2 months. So my point with that is, yes, I agree. Their pitching is going to have to be addressed in some shape or form. And that includes potentially spending money and even big money to go get pitching or to go make a really savvy trade or whatever you decide to do. They're going to have to address it. But I think the wrong thinking would be to overreact and just throw $250 million at Corbin Burnes without at least considering all of your options. But you're right, because they're going to be in a position where, okay, Zach Eflin will be the opening day starter, presumably. You hope that Grayson Rodriguez, who was throwing bullpens at the end of the year, will be, your number two. You hope that Dean Kramer builds on his second half, and you feel good about him as a middle of the rotation guy, if not a back of the rotation guy. But Kyle Bradish, best case scenario is he's back in August maybe. Tyler Wells, same kind of deal for him. So yeah, you're going to have to go out and do some work if Corbin Burnes doesn't return. So look, there are
but Corbin
many
Burnes
ways
returning,
to
it starts to look like 150 million after a start like that, right?
Oh, sure. Look, it's not going to be cheap. I mean, he's going to get paid by somebody because this is a guy who has a track record. And again, I want to stress, I'm not sitting here saying don't do it under any circumstances. That's not what I'm saying. In the same way that we've talked about Anthony Santander, there's a price point where I'd want to re-sign him. At the same time, I also remember the Chris Davis contract when he was coming off of a 47 home run season, and everyone was saying, oh my gosh, we must sign Chris Davis. We must sign Chris Davis. And everyone who says they didn't at the time is lying, because I remember the chance at the ballpark.
I have a screenshot from John Moeller that our relationship and him doing the show it did live long enough for me to give him ish about it. But I have a screenshot of his, if they don't sign Chris Davis, I'm done. Because there
were lots of people who said things like that.
Yeah. Like, so, and I would just say we're a long way removed from that, and they don't have any turd contracts right now. They don't have any. Mr. Rubenstein doesn't have any money on the books that are turd deal other than whatever he's paying Bobby Bonilla. Chris Davis is the one that every year is getting some money. Annuities is what they would say. Nice annuity. But he doesn't have any dead money like that, but he's going to have to step up. Sure. And I don't think he's a cheapskate. He's a billionaire, but he might still be a cheapskate. I don't know. Time will tell as to how this place is run, and that's why I sent him a letter on Tuesday. How are you running this place? You are Angelos now. Don't pretend you're out throwing hats. You're responsible. You're responsible for the fact that Luke has a press pass and I'm not. You're going to be responsible for the $200 million or not. And Elias will run cover for you and whatever, but and Katie Griggs has to go out and find money in this market where they couldn't give away $12 tickets for a playoff game at 4 o'clock because the kids were at school or the weather was bad or they didn't like the opponent or I was afraid of getting mugged or whatever stupid thing you'd say. But this is a business issue. I mean, for Luke, it is. It's a business issue as to how you afford Corbin Burnes or whether, Uncle Rubenstein's just going to be philanthropic because it's really expensive to have Corbin Burnes, and dare I say, you don't want to be in October without him, without it, because you had it and you still didn't win. But it gave you a chance, and I don't know. We can linger on. You want to do another one? Take a break. We haven't talked about the hitting because there hasn't been any.
Sure, and I'll leave you with this, and this will actually roll right into our discussion about the hitting. I mean, going back to what I said about there being more than one path to approach the offseason. You can go out and re-sign Corbin Burnes. Great. You need another right-handed bat in this lineup. At some point in time, we've got to acknowledge that. And you know what? Maybe it is Kobe Mayo next year, but I don't think you can put all your eggs in that basket. I think one of the problems that the Orioles have run into, and I think this is where you give Kansas City some credit, go look at what the Kansas City Royals did over their last offseason. And some of that was much more on the pitching side. That's not a great lineup. Bobby Witt, Vinny Pasquantino, they've got some hitters at the top of that order, but they've got a lot of have-nots in that lineup as well. Let's be clear.
They only got
not
the
overreact. Right, exactly. But my point is this team's kind of in that in-between phase with the old guard of the obviously Austin Hayes is gone. Cedric Mullins is going to be entering the last year of his deal. Santander's in a walk here. Go down Mountcastle. And the new guard, which, hey, Gunnar was a stud almost, he needed a couple months and he's their best player, right? That's fine. Adley Rutschman, we'll talk about that. Colton Cowser's taken a really nice step forward, but still want to see more consistency out of him. But,
Westberg would be their best player if it weren't for Henderson.
Westberg, Westberg, great. But, some of the other guys like, Jackson Holiday, he's 20. I'm not down on him, let's be clear, but he's 20. Heston Kjerstad, what is he, right? I mean, so they're kind of in this in-between phase where I think looking at how the Royals approached it, even though they don't have these great veteran bats in the middle of their lineup, but it's the same principle. They complemented some of their young talent with some established veterans. I mean, Cole Reagans looks so much better when he's got Seth Lugo and Michael Wacha backing him up in that rotation, right? So it just makes them better collectively. I think that's something the Orioles are going to have to look at this offseason, regardless of whether the season ends today, tomorrow, or maybe not if they go to the World Series. And maybe then we just say, hey, maybe it was good enough. But, I think that's something else they're going to have to take a look at because of the way that this offense struggled, especially, for a big chunk of August and for the first 3 weeks of September. So it's not just about Corbin Burnes or replacing Corbin Burnes and not just about the bullpen, but they've got to take a look at the lineup. I mean, how can you not? And we're going to spend our next segment talking about
Nothing.
nothing. No runs scored in what was the Orioles' ninth
Stay
straight
tuned,
postseason
everybody.
loss.
When we come back, we're going to talk about
Nothing.
nothing. Luke Jones is here. He is Baltimore Luke. We're going to be next Friday at Pizza John's. Look, I'm going to sell it. It's October. It's Sammy Hagar's birthday. It's Jim Palmer's birthday. It's your birthday. It's my birthday. We're getting all the birthdays together. Next Friday, the 11th, we'll be at Pizza John's. We'll have the Ravens scratch-offs to give away. I promise. We will get back to happy news. And the Ravens won. They look good. They scored points. And they're headed off to Cincinnati this week. But in the meantime, I hope we have 4 more baseball games before the 3 more baseball games before Sunday when the Ravens get together with the Cincinnati Bengals. He's Luke. I'm Nestor. We're back for more. Oyster Tour begins. Check it out. And please take seriously my letters, all my letters to Steve Bisciotti and John Harbaugh and Eric DaCosta. But I wrote a letter to David Rubenstein that launched on Tuesday, and I hope you read it and take it seriously. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We're back for more. We're WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore positive.